9 ruined multi-story buildings lay on the dirt road already partially reclaimed by the surrounding landscape. On top of an 8-story one sat a lone woman in her mid-20s, brown eyes looking through the scope of her rifle at the oncoming Vanuan soldiers. Spec Ops Squad, or at least as much as Vanuans understood the concept. 12 avian humanoids in full combat gear dragging a heavy canister between them, a hose carried by the lead. Lysin gas, Vanuan speciality. Flammable as all hell, but completely inert when exposed to air. The Vanuans had invaded human space almost 30 years back, and since then they'd been locked in a stalemate with human rebellions and covert operations giving the Vanuans hell everywhere they went. But the Vanuans had numbers and tech on their side, so we'd never been able to fully chase them off as they just kept replacing their fallen and injured. The truce their governments had agreed upon a few weeks ago was tenuous at best, doomed to failure just like the last time. They all knew it, and Vanuan soldiers weren't even trying to hide their blatant disregard for their government's orders to stop attacking. This was a chance for Michelle to turn the tide, or at least get some revenge. She took aim at the canister as they came closer. Her scope had to be reflecting the light above, but if it was, then the oncoming soldiers paid no attention to it. Arrogant fools. She'd had an hour before they arrived to prepare a plan and ambush, and it would go off flawlessly. She chuckled to herself as she pictured the looks on their faces at the end of all this, before crack. The shot rang out, but the canister was punctured long before the Vanuans could react. It tore itself apart as the pressures equalized, spraying Lysin gas everywhere, creating a massive fog bank. Crack! 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 3 more shots were fired into the fog, at positions she knew they had been in when her first shot was sent. Her heads-up display informed her she had struck 2 targets, evidently the third had moved. Her hunting trips with her father as a girl had paid off. She was considered the best shot in her boot camp for a reason. She waited impatiently as the yells of alarm and barked orders rang out. She understood a little Vanuan, enough to know they were trying to find her. She watched through her scope at the partially obscured figures below, trying to find the commander. As the fog turned to mist, she sighted the distinctive head plume and took aim. Crack! The final shot in her rifle slammed through the air and into the commander's helmet, sending them sprawling to the ground. Vanuan squads relied on their commanders. That loss would hurt them. Michelle snatched up the automatic weapon at her side as she sprinted to the edge of the building, throwing the rifle down below. She heard the shouts as it hit the ground. They would be looking in the right direction now. She vaulted off the southwest corner of the building, grabbing the zip line she had placed there before as she jammed the butt of the gun into her hip and fired at the soldiers below. She wasn't trying to hit them, though it'd be nice if she did. She was just trying to lure them. The recoil almost sent her tumbling from the zip line as she fired, but her tactic worked. The soldiers below were already running towards the building she was heading towards, and as she landed on the roof with a thud that knocked the wind out of her, she could hear them below. Vanuans were predictable. Without a commander to guide them, they'd resort to basic search tactics, and that's what she was counting on. Discarding the automatic weapon off the side of the building, she ran full tilt to the southeast corner to snatch up a semi-automatic rifle and a sidearm pistol. Jamming the pistol into its holster, she heard the telltale sounds of the doors 5 stories below being kicked in. She counted to 40 before vaulting over the side of the building again, pressing a button on her hip as she slid down the barely attached drainage pipe. Explosions tore through the building as all the charges she'd set went off one after the other. The sound was deafening, and she did her best to cover her ears and her face as dust and dirt from the shockwaves were sent through the windows next to her like miniature shrapnel. It was no good, though, and she got knocked clear near the end, falling half a full story onto the ground on her back. That'd certainly hurt tomorrow, but right now, with the adrenaline pumping through her, she barely felt a thing. She bolted across the short alleyway, diving through an open window into the next building before running through it, out another window, and into the final building before the trees. She raced to the ruined elevator, scrambling on top of the rusted heap and climbing up the cables to the 3rd floor, where she arrived at the last of her stashes. The simple life sign detector she'd left here told her that 4 Vanuans remained, moving quickly to clear the 2-story building next door. This one was 4 stories, though, and that gave her some breathing room. She grabbed it up, strapping it to her belt for safekeeping as she waited near the elevator well, peering down below. The left elevator had long since broken apart and fallen down, dragging its engine with it, but the right one still had its cables attached and could be used to ascend easily. Michelle had a plan to make sure they wouldn't try, though. As the life sensor showed them finishing clearing the building next door and entering the lobby of this one, she threw her rifle down to the bottom of the shaft, hearing it clatter as it hit the bottom. 4 flashlights snapped around to shine into the well, and she drew her sidearm and took aim at the entrance. Fools. Such predictable fools. A Vanuan soldier poked their head into the elevator shaft and looked up, clearly trying to find her. 2 bullets to the helmet dropped them like a sack of potatoes, and shouts of alarm rang out from downstairs. Michelle barely heard them as she sprinted up 2 flights of stairs into the rooftop elevator room where the engines were once held. As the explosion of a rigged claymore rang out below, and her life sign detector registered another one down, she clambered her way into the roof of the elevator shaft, wriggling into the far corner of the left one's housing. She could see into the room below through the open doors to the shaft, as well as a clear sight line down the whole shaft, but she herself was well hidden. She could hear the sounds of the final 2 ascending the stairs. They were moving slowly, obviously checking each door and step for traps. She'd run out with that final claymore, though, and as they encountered no resistance, their impatience began to manifest. They cleared rooms in a hurry, moved faster than they really should have been, and before long Michelle could hear them below her, preparing to break onto the roof. She idly wondered why they were bothering clearing the whole building when she'd already jumped off 2 of them. Surely they'd assume she was long gone by now. But then again, Vanuans were not known for their tactical intellect. Swarm tactics and basic concepts like clearing rooms was about the extent of it. The only thing keeping them in human space was there was just too many for the rebellions to kill. Finally, after the better part of 20 minutes, she heard them outside. She positioned herself carefully, ready to spring the final trap. The door crashed open, and they charged in looking towards the back wall. She pounced. Dropping her torso into the elevator shaft and holding on with her legs, she dangled upside down as her pistol snapped up. 4 shots, double-tapping them both in the head. They dropped down, motionless. She hauled herself back up, wriggling about to exit the crawl space she was in. As her boots slammed down near the fallen Vanuans, a foghorn ran out across the combat zone, and a voice in heavily accented Vanuan was projected by megaphones through the space. "Vanuan Special Forces Team Trillium, you have been fully defeated by the human force. Please pack up your gear and return to your bunker for a debriefing and whatever disciplinary measures your government takes." One of the Vanuans was already picking themselves up, groaning and holding their head. Michelle walked over to the other one who was having a harder time of it and offered a hand to them. They took it gratefully, letting her haul them to their feet as they gave her a thumbs up in thanks. Very odd gesture coming from a non-human. She returned the gesture and clapped them on the shoulder with a goofy grin on her face. "Better luck next time, mate." The Vanuan soldier made a noise like a human chuckle as she grabbed onto the elevator cable and practically flew down the intervening space to the ground floor, landing with a heavy thud. The Vanuan she'd shot at the base was sitting nearby the elevator entrance, nursing their head as a larger soldier looked on with an odd expression on their face. The larger one moved to block her path, and Michelle thought she might have a fight on her hands. It made a strange series of gestures with its talons, and Michelle recognized it as a crude interpretation of the universal sign language for good work. They must have picked it up while occupying some human world and adapted it to the Vanuan's 3 taloned hands. She tried not to think of how they extracted that sort of information as she gestured, "Thanks, you almost got me a few times there," in return. The big Vanuan made a laughing sound, almost like birdsong from the forest back home, and moved aside to let her exit. As she made her way towards the exit of the training area, She looked up the metal walls surrounding the artificial forest and held a thumbs-up sign high above her head. A figure far above on a platform returned the gesture as her squadmates appeared from the forest's edge to congratulate her on her victory, talking about each move she made and declaring she'd earned a few pints tonight. The figure turned to face the Vanuan general next to him as he lowered his arm. The general was gripping onto the railing with a force that threatened to break the metal rod. For the entire time the combat had gone on, the general had been staring at the screens protruding out of the base that had shown his soldiers' points of view. The human man spoke in slow but certain Vanuan. "General, this is why the stalemate has gone on for so long. This girl was fresh out of boot camp not 2 weeks ago, and look what she did to a squad of your best soldiers with naught but some common supplies and an hour to prepare. You cannot beat us, but we cannot beat you. Let's end this war before even more lives are wasted in this ceaseless conflict." The general just walked off towards their entourage, leaving to debrief their defeated men and talk to their government, all the while muttering about loss projections. A month later, the Vanuans came to the humans' government with a peace treaty, and so far this peace has never been broken. Every incoming Vanuan counselor is made to watch the video from that day, to know what a single determined human can do, and to ensure the peace between their nations continues.